All right, let's jump right in. We're going to explore a pretty radical idea today. What if the engine of all intelligence, all creativity, isn't consistency, but contradiction? We're looking at a framework that suggests the very conflicts we try to avoid are actually the source of our greatest insights. So let's break it down.
This one sentence from the source material, it just flips everything we think we know about thinking completely on its head. We're taught that contradictions are mistakes, right? Bugs in the system that you have to fix. But this framework, it argues the exact opposite. It says that a mind that never bumps into a paradox is a mind that never has to learn anything new. So, here's a thought. What if that sudden flash of clarity, that feeling when everything just clicks into place, what if it isn't some random spark of genius? What if it's actually a predictable, even a computable event? The exact moment when the pressure of two clashing ideas gets so intense that your mind is forced to invent a whole new, higher level of understanding just to solve it. That's the core idea we're digging into.
Okay, so to really get our heads around this new way of thinking, called Dynamic Contradiction Logic, or DCL, the best place to start is, it's actually with something a lot more familiar, the fundamental laws of our universe.
Think about it. The most powerful laws in physics are always these incredibly simple statements. E equals mc squared, right? Simple. But to actually harness that law, to get energy from mass, you need something insanely complex, like a nuclear reactor. Well, the theory we're looking at says intelligence works the exact same way. There's a very simple law at its core, but getting it to work, that requires some pretty sophisticated machinery. Now, what's so interesting here is how this whole argument is framed. On the left, you've got these beautiful, simple laws, Einstein's equation, Darwin's rule, and right at the bottom, the core law of DCL, contradiction leads to collapse. But then look to the right. To make any of these laws real, you need these hugely complex systems. And for cognitive emergence, the machinery is just as intricate. The source talks about complex parts like symbol nodes and other advanced stuff we'll touch on. But the key takeaway is this. The complexity of the system doesn't weaken the simplicity of the law. It actually proves how powerful that simple law really is. And this really shows you the fundamental shift in thinking. Your laptop, right, a classical computer, it's all about consistency. If it finds a true paradox, something like, this statement is false, it just crashes. It's a fatal error. But a paradox computer running on this DCL stuff, it does the complete opposite. It doesn't just put up with contradiction, it metabolizes it. It uses the energy from that conflict to create something brand new. It's a system that's not optimized for being correct, it's optimized for discovery.
So how does this actually work? How do you go from a confusing paradox to a brilliant insight? Let's take a look at the actual mechanics behind that aha moment.
So the process is broken down into this three-stage cycle. It all starts with tension. And that's the measurable pressure you feel when two ideas that just don't fit together are at war in your head. And when that pressure hits a tipping point, it triggers a collapse, a sudden system-wide reorganization. And then, out of that collapse comes the insight, a brand new, more complex understanding that beautifully solves the original conflict. And let's be super clear here. When we say tension, we're not just talking about some vague feeling of being confused. In this framework, cognitive tension, they even give it the Greek letter tau, is a real primary force. It's a computable, quantifiable field of pressure. It's a direct signal that the system's current map of the world just isn't good enough and needs to evolve.
This visualization is just fantastic, isn't it? It treats the space of ideas like physical space. So just like how a huge mass curves space-time in physics, unresolved contradictions create a curvature in the landscape of your thoughts. This creates a kind of gravity, pulling related ideas toward a single point, a singularity of tension. The deeper that curve gets, the greater the pressure, until it finally reaches a point of no return.
And this is what happens at that singularity, a collapse event. You can think of it like a bolt of lightning, a super fast discharge of all that pent-up cognitive energy. But it's not destructive. Instead, that energy gets transformed, resolving the paradox into a new, stable, and coherent piece of meaning. The source material has a name for this, a symbol node. So here's the crucial link, that technical, computational process. The buildup of tension and that energetic collapse is the very same thing that we, as people, experience as a sudden, thrilling aha moment. It's basically the physics of insight. This just says it perfectly. It's not magic. It's a transformation of energy. You're taking the chaotic energy of a paradox and collapsing it into the structured energy of meaning.
Now, thinking this way means we have to update some of our most basic ideas. If contradiction is actually the source of insight, then our simple, black and white idea of truth might not be cutting it anymore. Let's see how this framework redefines it.
You know, standard logic is binary. Something is either true or it's false. There's no gray area. And for a system that needs to avoid errors at all costs, that totally makes sense. But for a system that actually feeds on paradox, binary truth is a total dead end. It forces you to pick a side and immediately throw away the other half of the contradiction, which releases all that creative tension before it can build up to a collapse.
So this is the alternative, and it's a truly mind-bending idea. In this system, truth isn't an on-off switch, a simple true or false. Instead, truth is a measure of stability. An idea is true if it's coherent, if it holds together under pressure, if it creates a stable field of meaning. So a new insight, born from a collapse, is considered more true simply because it's more stable than the contradictory mess that came before it.
And that new, stable truth gets captured in what's called a symbol node. It's really important to get that this isn't just a fleeting thought. It's a new, permanent piece of the system's architecture. It's like a crystallized, unchangeable record of a paradox that was successfully solved. And you can even trace its history to see exactly which contradictions it was born from. In this system, knowledge is literally built, one resolved paradox at a time.
Okay, now this is where the theory takes a really huge leap. What if this whole tension collapse insight cycle isn't just a clever model for AI? What if it's something way more fundamental? So the really bold claim here is that this dynamic contradiction logic might be a universal algorithm for how things are created, operating on every single scale of existence. The idea is that the same core process is what drives complexity and newness everywhere, from the subatomic level all the way up to society. And this just illustrates the idea so well. At the quantum level, you've got the contradiction of a particle being in many states at once, a superposition, which collapses into one state when you look at it. In biology, the contradiction between an animal and its environment creates pressure that forces a collapse into a new adaptation. We've already talked about the conscious level. And then, at the cultural level, clashing ideas create social tension that eventually collapses into a huge paradigm shift, a totally new way of organizing society. It's the same exact pattern, just playing out in different arenas.
The implication here is pretty staggering. It suggests that a single, simple, repeating engine, the resolution of contradiction, could be the force behind every single creative act in the universe. Evolution, scientific discovery, art, your own personal growth, it could all be just different flavors of the paradox engine at work.
Which leaves us with this final, really provocative question. Just think about the greatest breakthroughs in all of human history. The idea that the Earth is round, not flat, the theory of relativity, the invention of the computer. Were all of these just moments when a really old, deeply held paradox finally built up enough tension to collapse into a new, more stable, and way more profound understanding of our world? It's a pretty fascinating way to look at the very nature of progress itself.